The Cannabis Conversation. A European perspective on the emerging legal cannabis industry.
Welcome to the Cannabis Conversation with Anuj Desai, where we explore the new legal cannabis industry by speaking to the professionals that are helping to shape it. Very excited. Today is our 40th episode, another small landmark. We'll have to put some serious thought into how we celebrate the 50th episode coming up. It's been an amazing experience and I've massively grown in confidence over the period in terms of putting this all together. I still get a bit nervous before each show though, which I think is probably quite a nice thing. On this episode, we've got a great woman called Giadha from New Frontier Data, who are a great company doing great things in the industry, and we'll be talking about data. Enjoy. On today's show, I've got Giadha Aguirre de Carcer, who is the founder and CEO of New Frontier Data. New Frontier is a US company, and it's an independent technology-driven analytics company specializing in the cannabis sector. I'm really pleased to get Giadha on the show. It's great to understand how important data and analytics are in this industry, and hopefully she'll be able to give us a few market insights as well. Welcome, Giadha.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Oh, no, pleasure to have you on. Loads to talk about. I think you've got a great business, but it might just be good to sort of start off with a bit of an introduction of who you are and a bit about New Frontier.
Absolutely. Well, let's see. So I started the company in 2014 here in Washington, D.C. in the United States. Mm-hmm. My background is in financial analytics. That was sort of my first job with JP Morgan Chase right out of school. And then I went on to intelligence collection, working with a lot of cool technology, and then went on and sort of merging the two and adding a little flavor of emerging markets, which was my third career in 2014. Right. At that time, I stumbled upon this new emerging market, the cannabis industry. And upon taking a look at it, I realized early on, or relatively quickly, that there was no actual industry reporting, not at least to the standard, the one in research and financial analytics would be used to. The light bulb went on, and I realized that the reason why there was no industry reporting and there was no research is because there was no data being collected on which to base the research and the reporting. And so New Frontier Data was born in August of 2014 to solve that problem. And we're a big data technology firm. We're basically a tech firm, referred to as a fintech firm. We took 3 years to build the infrastructure so we could help in this rather fragmented data space, not just in America, but globally. As you know, there are no standards across regulations or even nomenclature. So data ingestion is a bit of an art and science at the same time. But we have since 2014 been able to, again, amass millions of data points across 3 continents now, every single vertical that impacts the industry, anything from private information, transaction information, obviously no personal identifying information, but all the way to energy consumption or real estate price fluctuation when a state legalizes. And so we're able to report on the market as a whole. Risk and opportunity is sort of our bread and butter. And now we are slowly but surely moving into other areas that also require sophisticated data access.
Wow. I mean, that's a great story. And I think great that you're sort of taking your previous career and sort of applying it to this new nascent sector as well. Do you guys cover patient data at all?
Yes. So about 3 years ago, it became very clear, especially from a global perspective, that cannabis is very much utilized for medical purposes, whether you self-report as a medical user or not. Mm-hmm. And so we began intaking patient information, again, no PII, no personal identifying information. We collect from Canada and some states in the US. And we've just begun reporting primarily on patient behavior, some high-level symptomology. We do not report on sort of more clinical level medical sort of information.
Yeah. I mean, that's great. There's a few initiatives in the UK that are kind of looking at patient data as well. It's a really fascinating area because I've talked about it on a few previous shows, the difficulty of fitting medical cannabis into a kind of pharmaceutical Western medicine model is quite a challenge. So patient data is really important.
Indeed. And that will drive sort of it's one of the large driving forces for the market in the future. I noted sort of that we've now begun reporting to new vertical. And in fact, one of those new verticals is very much born from Europe, stemming from European demand across fast-moving CPG, consumer packaged good enterprises, very much positioned in sort of that health and beauty space, a little adjacent from medical, but whereby medical behavior, medical sort of patient behavior and medical applications still sort of are pertinent and relevant.
Yeah, I mean, loads to talk about there. I guess just talking a bit more about New Frontier's story, was it quite challenging to get this off the ground? I'm assuming it is. Every enterprise is, but...
Oh boy, if I had known then what I know today. I have aged 40 years, gained twice as much weight. It's been quite the adventure, but it's been fun and exciting too, so I can't complain. The biggest challenge, I'm a Latina woman, and I think that launching a big data technology firm in what was referred to then as the pot industry, or going into the drug business, as many still felt cannabis was a surprise to many people. And so, yes, I hit a few walls here and there, as I like to say. However, I didn't hit any glass ceilings or any grass ceilings. So I was able to eventually build an incredible team, truly incredible, that helped us sort of set up shop. And we were also able to partner with some very well-entrenched companies in the space that had been born of the movement, because in the US, the cannabis industry was very much born of sort of the movement, the LGBTQI movement. And that gave me sort of that entry into the space. But it was challenging. My first million was raised almost $50,000 at a time. That's how much appetite there was for big data in what people thought of us as the green rush. So it was a pickle, but here we are.
Yeah, well done and congratulations. I get your daily email.
Cannabis.
Yeah, it's the perfect kind of information source for me, so I think it's great. And how was the whole process of raising money? Because, I mean, this is a brilliant ancillary play, isn't it? You know, data, where everyone's focusing on cultivation, or at least a lot of people are. Did you find that, was it an easy sell or was it quite hard?
You know, this is my fourth business. Apparently, I'm a true masochist, or also known as serial entrepreneur. You know, they're interchangeable. But I will say that timing is everything. And the 2014 was just, it could have been just, I think a few months or a year earlier might have just been too early for us to succeed. Because as you very well pointed out, in 2014 in the United States, you had about 8 states, but really it was Colorado, California, that had made an impression. And there was real true activity and infrastructure and licensing going on. And then we had Canada. But the world as a whole thought of the cannabis industry as either drug business, or they saw this green rush opportunity where anything touching the plant was of interest to investors. It was, again, that green rush, that very quick return on investment. And so everyone wanted to invest in cultivation, in retail. They were beginning to experiment with sort of edibles and beverages. But big data, not alone data, but big data, there wasn't a lot of appetite for it. There weren't a lot of very large investors involved. It was primarily angel investors, so smaller checks. You know, 2016, 2017 is when you began to see sort of the $1 million checks. And so, it was challenging to sort of, I guess, sell the fact that at the end of the day, when you look at any emerging market or any market period, without data, you are unable to provide transparency, and you're unable to accurately project and predict risks and opportunity, and therefore you're more likely to not be successful in navigating the industry, and overall the industry as a whole would not grow in a healthy manner. And so it took a minute.
Yeah, I mean it's brilliant, isn't it? You know, what's the sort of most interesting data that you're sort of dealing with, do you think? Because there's loads of different areas you're working in.
Yes. And, you know, if I may take a step back, this may be useful, maybe it's obvious, but it wasn't to the folks that I was talking to at the time. There is a very big difference, pardon the pun, between big data and data. So data analytics is one thing. Big data requires the 3 V's: velocity, variety, and volume, right?
Right.
So big data means that you are ingesting in real time, preferably processing in microseconds, millions of data points with enough history and variety to be statistically meaningful so that you can predict. So when you ask the question, what is the most interesting data set? My Lord, I could not even begin to tell you. Thousands of data streams and different data sets. So I think, one of the surprises that I guess we had in 2016 was when we began to see the advanced industrial applications of hemp and began to collect data not only on CBD stemming from hemp, but begin to see sort of the other applications. And I'm still fascinated by everything that hemp can do for research and science and development catches up.
Oh, I'm glad you said that, because hemp is a fascinating area for me, and I've tried to do a few more shows on hemp because I'm just a massive supporter of it. So it's good to hear that you're into it too.
It's the future. The cannabis industry is going to look quite different in the next 5 to 10 years if research and development continues the way it is within the industrial, but advanced industrial applications of hemp. So for sure.
And in terms of New Frontier, what are your kind of main drivers of the business? Consultancy or reports or?
So excellent question. Most folks know us for reports. And again, going back to 2014, where no one really cared about big data. So we had to put out and deliver something that there was an appetite for. And so market research was really what folks were looking for. And market research, mind you, with a strong informational and educational flavor, not a lot of predicting at that point. So we do our reports today are downloaded in over 89 countries, which illustrates the spam and the vast interest around the globe for the industry. But we're not a market research firm. We're really not. The market research reports and the studies are just one way that we package the information. In late 2016, 2017, we launched our online portal, which is a little closer to what really our core competency is, allowing access to data streams to primarily financial institutions. So for instance, Bloomberg is a client. Right. Where they get raw data stream so they can do their own analytics and they can put out their own indices and market benchmarks. And then it wasn't until literally 18 months ago that we didn't start actually licensing data streams, again, to larger multinational enterprises beyond the financial sector. So think, and I'm giving completely illustrative terms, but the Johnsons & Johnson, the Procter & Gamble's, the Garniers, Health and Beauty, again, those CPG enterprises that are looking to engage and understand this very unique cannabis consumer and therefore need very sophisticated and large volumes of consumer behavior data, consumer engagement data, product data, etc. So our core, I would say, is truly data licensing and sort of data processing and turn into indices through our online portal. But I'm sure that we'll always continue to provide those studies. I think the studies help keep us trusted, I guess, by providing good predictive analytics.
Yeah, for sure. And I think trust is a really interesting word as well. Given the amount of stigma we need to overcome in this industry, it's almost like you kind of need to do a bit better than a business in another sector.
And the amount of misinformation.
Yes.
It's not to be underestimated, unfortunately. Now, mind you, that's not only pertinent to the cannabis industry. We can argue misinformation is unfortunately a global virus. But in the cannabis industry, because there aren't for instance, there are no other big data companies in the entire world other than us, which to me is very surprising. There are data analytics firms out there, but they don't have big data capabilities. So as you know, the accuracy sort of may not be what it should be. Sourcing is still, the methodology and sourcing is still lacking in many of the reports that I see out there, which is not good. And then the last part is being unbiased and neutral. Mm-hmm. It is, this plant, there's so much passion around this plant, and for due reason, there's absolutely good reasons for it. But when one is in the business of reporting, you really have to keep a very neutral sort of stance and be very unbiased in your reporting so that you can provide, that good, bad, and ugly, right? It's great when it's good news, but you want to know the bad news so you can avoid the problems. Yeah. And so I think that's also a challenge, and one that we take great pride in sort of, at least doing everything we can to be extremely objective in our reporting.
That's great. I mean, I love it. I always preach balance on this show, and yeah, there's a lot of people who are very passionate about it, sometimes don't want to hear anything negative about cannabis.
Right.
And look, there's nothing on the planet that is 100% perfect. Cannabis is no different. And I like that kind of almost agnostic approach that you take through data. Data is data, right? It will show up what it shows up. Cool. So that's great. What's next for New Frontier? What's new areas that you're looking at?
tongue-in-cheek, the next frontier. And I'm only half joking. We are in the process of completing 2 acquisitions to create a new solution called the Next Frontier Solution. And it is really very much intended to help and to support and to serve, really, as I mentioned earlier, those sophisticated data consumers that come from the advertising space and from those large CPG and multinational enterprises that are looking to engage with the cannabis industry. Advertising agencies and any ad tech type, solution are probably today they have the largest consumption of data in terms of diversity, volume, and real-time volume. It really is a very, very sophisticated data consumer group. And so in order for us to be able to meet those needs with the level of sophistication and that in variety and accuracy, we had to fill some gaps, some data gaps. And so we're closing these 2 acquisitions, and we'll be launching the Next Frontier Solution probably very early next year. But the idea is to expand sort of that data reporting and those data streams to others that need it, not only across the globe and regions, but also across verticals. And speaking of regions, we have just opened an office in London. We are in the process of opening an office likely in Colombia and another one in Australia, most likely Perth, because we also know that there's massive, obviously, demand and then there's a lot of activity when it pertains to cannabis and also hemp in Latin America and in Asia Pacific. And we're also beginning to do some work and coverage in Africa. Africa is also a very interesting continent when it comes to hemp cultivation and potential CBD extraction as it pertains to meeting the explosive demand of CBD that we're seeing in Europe.
Yeah, and that's brilliant that you're taking a really global approach. One of the things I love about cannabis is that it is a really, really global business because everyone's taking a slightly different approach to it.
Yes, absolutely. And the more research there is, the more we discover, the more the applications we discover, the more it continues to expand and touch other sectors, adjacent sectors. So certainly a very interesting global industry.
Yeah, for sure. Are there any kind of high-level market trends that you've sort of spotted, both in North America and the rest of the world?
Absolutely. And I would start running off with a bunch of numbers. But if you don't mind, I'll give you the qualitative aspect, which I think may be more interesting. But if anyone is looking for the actual figures, our reports are mostly free for download on our website. We do provide a lot of free information as part of our mission. In terms of large trends, well, it was in North America, we're seeing adult use certainly taking over from a sales perspective of a medical still. At least we project that it will continue to be the faster moving segment from retail and sales for the next 5 years. The 2 markets together, we're looking at $30+ billion in terms of sales. Global demand, which we finally were able to estimate both legal and illegal, so think in terms of the legal and illegal market, is as of last year at about 344 billion across the world. So certainly a large opportunity. And in terms of number of cannabis consumers, again, whether patients or whether for adult use, recreational, we're looking at over 266 million across the world. So certainly a very large market. The largest demand stems from Asia Pacific, and I mean, that's really a numbers game, followed by North America and then Europe and Latin America in that order. So certainly we continue to look at what's happening in Asia Pacific. We're beginning to see some import-exports trends from a regional perspective, which is very new and very interesting. So Europe, for instance, is beginning to emerge as a net importer region, right? There's a lot of demand, again, for CBD specifically, but also, there begins to be interest certainly in THC, not only in the pharmaceutical space. But Europe, at least as of now, despite the fact that some cultivation has, of course, emerged across the region, is still not doesn't have a sufficient supply to meet the demand. So we're seeing them importing from Canada. Ironically, Canada can also not meet the demand, so they're importing from Latin America, and it's not going to Europe. So Canada is looking themselves to set themselves as a net exporter. And they're certainly trying to internally with regulation, but also with the various partnerships that they're forging across various countries. They really want to set themselves up as sort of a large net exporter of cannabis, obviously infused primarily, but also in terms of manufacturing products. US, because it's federally illegal, you're not seeing a lot of import-export activity, which is interesting because some would argue that there's a lost opportunity there for the United States. And then we have, if we move a little bit to Asia Pacific, there we have Australia, that would be the third country to fully legalize a medical and adult use after Canada and Honduras. And they want to set themselves up as a net exporter in the region as well. They are looking from a scientific perspective, they certainly are doing advances, but they really would like to see themselves as exporting to the entire Oceania area and expand to Asia Pacific. As of today, Australia is a net importer, however, so it'll be interesting to see. Continuing with the Asia, and this may of interest to you because of the hemp interest, India and China. Well, first of all, China is the largest producer of hemp in the world. They produce about over 90% of all hemp used for primarily textile, mind you. This is not CBD. It's for textile uses. And they have very sophisticated operation. In fact, there are 2 provinces in China that are licensed to cultivate hemp, and one of them, which is the largest supplier of the 2, their entire operation is automated. I mean, they literally track seasons through satellites, and everything is done through drones. It feels like a futuristic movie. So with that level of scalability, right, and automation, they would be very well positioned if they wanted to indeed, transition from textile to more advanced applications of the hemp plant. So CBD extraction would be next, but there's also a conversation about other things, such as, the fact that there are applications of hemp that seem to extend battery life. It also seems that it carbonizes at lower temperatures than graphene. Therefore, it can become a cheaper and faster semiconductor in all production of chips, manufacturing of chips. And then next to it, India, which also has been a relatively large hemp producer, not as large as China, but with such tech hub in India, as you can imagine, they're also looking at sort of these advanced, beyond CBD extraction, these advanced application of hemp, and there may be a play there. So that's a little bit of the global sort of dynamic of how the regions are expanding. Oh, I skipped Latin America. Latin America, very interesting, definitely positioned to be a net exporter. And they actually would love to export to North America beyond Canada, so the US, obviously. Latin America, very interesting because their climate is optimal across the board in most cases, and also good agro land with good infrastructure from agro-based perspective, very cheap labor. So very competitive when it comes to cultivation. The issues there are corruption, and regulatory frameworks are still unstable, to say the least. But Latin America is expanding fast, moving very fast, and sort of positioning themselves as a key region in this global cannabis sort of ecosystem. So that's overall what we're seeing. And then let me give you a little bit of consumers, because that's something that I find very interesting. So the cannabis consumer, we've actually profiled it last year, and we created, I think it was 16 consumer archetypes, which is the first time that cannabis consumer archetypes were put out there. And it was really interesting to see overall how unique the cannabis consumer behavior is. Cannabis consumer tends to be affluent and very educated, so seeking of information, and very active online. Their engagement is certainly higher than the traditional consumer period. And when you look at their online cart, it can be 2 to 3 times larger than a non-cannabis consumer. So It's really an interesting segment. Also of interest today on a global scale, but primarily in North America, men continue to drive sort of larger consumption. However, women are the fastest growing consuming group. And we see that due to the fact that they're not only consuming for themselves, because now they can do so discreetly with an edible or a vape. And, sort of they're replacing that 4 o'clock glass of wine, with an edible. But also because they certainly are sort of the nurturer, right? The caregiver, traditionally speaking, not to be sexist here, but as caregivers, they're no longer only buying for themselves, but they're buying for their, for the aging parents and families. And so they're becoming a very interesting consumer segment within the cannabis consumer group. So I'll leave it there because I could talk about this all day. But some interesting trends that we're seeing. It's a truly fascinating global market is what I think.
Yeah. And thank you. That's such a brilliant summary of what's going on around the world, and barely scratching the surface, because obviously you can go into much more detail. But thank you for that. I think the audience will find that really, really useful. Sort of moving on towards the end of the interview, I just thought it'd be also nice to sort of speak about maybe a bit about your personal journey as a female founder in the cannabis industry and as a kind of entrepreneur and leader. How have you kind of found it all? Because it is still quite, from the UK perspective, I go to a lot of conferences and stuff, and it is quite male dominated. So I wonder what it's like in North America.
Well, yes, it is male dominated. I mean, but think about it. It's not so much that cannabis is male dominated, which, by the way, it is more male dominated outside of the US. I will say that.
Right.
When I entered the industry in 2014, part of the reason why I jumped head first, despite the apparent reputational risk and stigma, was because my professional career had been in banking, in intelligence, so sort of pseudo-military, and in technology. And let me tell you, those things are extremely male-dominated.
Yeah.
And so it was, I had some wonderful male colleagues, but it was a difficult environment for me to get to gain the career advancement that I wanted.
Sure.
So I entered the cannabis industry because I truly felt, and it was true at the time, it was an open field. It was just clean canvas. There was no predetermined look that you had to have. There was no profile of the cannabis entrepreneur. They certainly were not pre-established cliques or clubs or male-dominated clubs. It was an easier entry. Now, it changed very quickly. In fact, in 2016, we put out a report that looked at women-owned businesses versus men. And that, I think it was 30% in 2016, and it went down to half the following year. And what's happening is that other mature industry players and professionals are coming in, and they're coming in the male form primarily. Now, the rest of the world in the cannabis industry remains very much male-dominated, but that's also because the industry is emerging from a different place, right? In the US, again, movement-driven industry. In the rest of the world, it starts off as already a mature market, right? With very large enterprises, with infrastructures and deep pockets and know-how coming in sort of at high level. So certainly male-dominated. And then the fact that I'm in big data and technology in cannabis just makes me kind of an oddball. and don't get me wrong, I definitely am an oddball. So it's been interesting. Things are getting better, but I'm not going to paint a rosy picture. A week ago, I was at an investor cocktail party, and someone said to me that I was very attractive, which was very nice, and then went on to say that I was probably there because I was so cute. So that stuff still happens.
Yeah. I think, that happens in every industry, doesn't it?
Of course.
And no surprise that cannabis is the same.
Yeah, but it's getting better. I am actually optimistic. I believe it's getting better. And you know how I know it's getting better? Because I'm the CEO and founder of this company, and we're one of the largest companies in cannabis. So it can't be that bad if I was able to do it.
Yeah, no. And I think the more stories like yourself, the more inspiration people would take from it, from whatever background they are. And I also hold a lot of hope for the future in terms of the makeup of the industry.
I think it has a good basis to foster sort of good professional dynamics if we all are honest with, looking at things of the way they are and sort of make an effort to raise the bar. I'm equally optimistic.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it's, one example is I think everyone is, the good business people that I'm meeting, they're thinking about sustainability and all sorts of building a business from the start with the right kind of morals, I think. Don't get me wrong, there's still some shady people around as well.
Oh, the cannabis industry is colorful. It is unique. But values, for instance, I think are becoming... Listen, I hear a lot about millennials, and I don't mean to digress here, but the especially people of my generation that may get a little frustrated with some of the aspects of millennials. Well, one of the wonderful aspects that millennials bring to bear is the fact that they are so driven by values and morals and doing the right thing. So I think we have a good mix of dynamics and generations today in the workforce, but certainly in the cannabis industry, that is hopefully a good cocktail, a good makeup for this to be sort of to maybe set a new tone. It is a new industry. There is an opportunity to set things from the start. And so it'll be interesting to see how those particular dynamics evolve.
Yeah, absolutely. And it will constantly be changing over the next long period of time, I suppose. So now I'm going to move on to my customary final question. What did your parents say when you told them that you were getting into the weed?
Oh, Lord. So I'm an immigrant, and I'm half Italian, half Cuban. So I think my mom said something along the lines of, "Ay, Dios mío." And then she went on to tell my family, "Oh my God, my daughter is getting into the drug business. She's she's going to sell the pot." So my family was not enthused about the career move for the same reason that any other peer sort of were confused about what it was. I mean, the cannabis industry, first of all, they still called it marijuana, pot, and weed in 2014 when I started. There wasn't really appreciation for sort of everything else that the cannabis industry could bear. So my mom had a mini aneurysm.
So I shouldn't laugh. I shouldn't.
And she, I think it wasn't until 3 years into it, I kid you not, she saw me on CNN in a suit, not in a tie-dye shirt, stoned. I think it drove home the fact that I really was a legitimate professional. But yes, I laugh now, but it wasn't so funny at the time.
No, it's a challenging conversation, isn't it? Yeah, so I come from an Indian background, and I'm a former lawyer, and so I had a very similar conversation with my parents.
Yep.
But look, you've managed to build one of the most successful businesses in the space. So yeah, it's testament to courage, I suppose, on your part, and good business brain.
And being a little nuts. Sure.
Well, yeah.
A little of that, yes.
Yeah, like you said, it's your fourth business. You're glutton for punishment.
Yes, indeed. But it's been fun. It's been fun.
Good. Well, Giadha, thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. It was so fascinating. We could definitely talk way more on market trends, etc. I'm very excited to learn that you've opened an office in London, so I'd love to say hello next time you're in town.
Absolutely. You should come visit. And this has been a lovely discussion. Really appreciate your podcast. Love how you're covering sort of the industry from so many angles. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. No, I really appreciate it. Thank you, Giadha. Thanks for joining me for that. I hope you enjoyed that show. Giadha's a great entrepreneur, and I think it's really important to have some strong data in this industry. So I encourage you all to check out some of New Frontiers' reports for some great insights. I myself am toying with a few ideas on how to develop the podcast, actually. So if you're a content producer or writer of any sort and are interested in the cannabis space, please drop me a line either through LinkedIn or the email address on the website, and I'd love to chat to you. Now we're into December, firmly in Christmas party territory, so I'm hoping not to spend most of the month hungover. Let's see how that goes. I've got another great guest coming up next week. I'm yet to decide who it will be. I've got a few shows recorded, but enjoy your weeks in the meantime, and I'll see you next Wednesday. Cheers.